Across America tonight, war in the Gulf. The Allies stream into Kuwait City to be greeted as hero liberators.
We have U.S. Embassy in American hands at this time.
Iraqi soldiers by the thousands give up without a fight. And the Allies take on the Republican Guard in what may be the last big battle of the Persian Gulf War. From CBS News, this is America Tonight, with Charles Kuralt in New York and Susan Spencer in Saudi Arabia.
Good evening. An American pilot who flew over Kuwait today was asked what the Iraqi retreat looks like from the air. He shook his head. It's bumper to bumper, he said. It's the road to Daytona Beach at spring break, just bumper to bumper. But not all the Iraqi troops are able to retreat now. They are cut off with the choice of fighting or surrendering. And these include Saddam Hussein's most able professional soldiers. David Martin at the Pentagon. Where do things stand now?
Well, Charles, what is undoubtedly the biggest battle of the war began overnight in Iraq when American tank divisions from the 7th Corps launched an assault against the Republican Guards. Under cover of darkness, 3 U.S. Army divisions, that's a force of nearly 1,000 tanks, attacked 2 Republican Guards divisions in a driving rain that military officers say turned the Iraqi desert to a sea of mud. Initial reports say one of the Guards divisions was defeated and that American casualties were light. At last report, the battle against the other Guards division was continuing. At the same time, U.S. Army Apache helicopters have attacked a 3rd Iraqi division located in western Kuwait and further north near the Euphrates River. Troops of the 18th Airborne Corps, which drove deep into Iraq to cut off the avenues of retreat, captured an entire Iraqi convoy, including 50 of their best tanks. It is now dawn in Iraq, the start of a day which military officers say will bring further attacks on the Republican Guard. It is probably, Charles, inaccurate to say that these battles will be decisive simply because the outcome of this battle or of this war has already been decided. But there are still 6 Republican Guard divisions to be reckoned with, and if the U.S. Army has its way, this could be their last day as fighting units. However long it takes, U.S. officials say the war will not stop until the Republican Guards have been disarmed. Charles?
David, thank you. Well, Bob McEwen of CBS News started this day, 40 miles or so south of Kuwait City, with an advancing column of Arab soldiers.
The Allies were headed north along the eastern front at 8 this morning. By 10, they would move farther towards Kuwait City than they had in the previous day. The Marines surrounded buildings believed to hide Iraqis. They searched underground fortifications. They took prisoner those who showed the white flag.
There is no hope for us.
That was just the start of Bob McEwen's day. He didn't see any Iraqi troops up the road. So he and David Green and Andy Thompson and Ed Jackson and the CBS News cameras just kept rolling on up the road, headed for Kuwait City, ahead of the Allied forces. And by nightfall, Bob McEwen found himself driving around in the empty capital of Kuwait with no soldiers of either side in sight. So he stopped to have a talk with Dan Rather.
We have Bob McEwen live up from, we believe, inside Kuwait City. Bob, are you there?
Dan, I'm here, and I think from this day forward, history will record that Independence Day here in Kuwait, certainly here in Kuwait City, will be February the 26th, 1991. I've just come from a brief drive around the city. On the way in to Kuwait City, burned out hulks of Iraqi tanks, of Iraqi military vehicles, and as you got closer to Kuwait City, Iraqi military vehicles that had simply been abandoned, clothes strewn around them. Obviously, the occupants had left in great haste. And as we drove down the Fahil freeway into Kuwait City, people in their backyards waving at us, people driving their cars, shaking their fists and showing the V for Victory sign, and everywhere the Kuwaiti flag flying again.
Bob McEwen, any sign of atrocities that you've seen thus far?
Now, with me
Please,
is Abdul
go ahead.
Majid Yusuf, who is a fellow we flagged down on the street as he drove by, and he spoke English, and he's been giving me a little bit of a tour of Kuwait. Abdul Majid, can you give me a sense of what happened last night here?
Last night, in the beginning, I send all my regards to all my family and to everybody, and to President Bush and Sheikh Jabir and everybody. And really, we are happy, and really, I'm talking now to you. I don't know how to explain to you how it happened. Last night, really, I have a videotape. I'm staying in Salwa. I'm behind of the
That's a
police
suburb
station in
out to the
Salwa.
south.
Yeah, close, no, here, close to Salwa side, in Masila Beach side. In the night, we saw them, they are moving. They taking the civilian car, which they robbed them from us. They take the civilian car, they're moving around. They came to the soldiers. They're moving a lot in the police station. And in the night, at 1 o'clock, we hear they are drawing. And they are moving. We hear bombing a lot. We said, what happened? We hear they are exploding all what they have exactly.
They were letting off their explosives.
Yeah. They burn all the hotels, which is the seaside. Hyatt Regency, Sats Hotel, all the places. They burn them. And they bomb, they explode everything there.
Now, we have heard reports of disappearances, of people being abducted from their homes, of people being killed in the 2 or 3 days before the Iraqis left. Can you confirm that?
In the Friday after the praying, see, the people, my neighbor, his name is Hussein Yassi. My neighbor, they take them. In the Friday after praying, they take the people. They stop the people with the family, I swear to God, with the family. The wife and the children, they take the ID, they told them, take your wife and the children and come back again to us. And my neighbor, he came and he dropped his family and he go back again. And we don't know where he is now.
Give me a sense of what last night was like.
Last night was like hell, sir. Like hell in Kuwait, because the bombing, so much bombing, and these Kuwaiti troops, Iraqi troops, I mean, they was running away from all over Kuwait. Their tanks, their people, and some of them, they was taking some people from the Muassa hospital. There was some injured Iraqis, they took them with them. They were shouting, yelling, and there was in a mess yesterday, these Iraqis. They was like in a mess. And the Kuwaiti, I mean, the allies, they was hitting him very hard yesterday.
There are no way to be Arabs. They are not Muslims at all. They destroy Kuwait, they destroy the people.
Let me ask you about the specific ways in which the Iraqis disrupted life. In terms of the economy, what did they do? Was it possible for people to pursue their jobs? Was it possible for people to operate their bank accounts?
No, see, the day which they exchanged the money, the Kuwaiti dinars with the Kuwaiti Iraqi, in the banks that before, there was Iraqi dinar, Kuwaiti dinars, everybody go to the banks. The day they would stop, they exchange the Kuwaiti dinars with Iraqi dinars, nobody go to the banks. See? Nobody go to the banks at all. And after that, the Kuwaitis, which they have money, some of the Kuwaitis, they sell their video, they sell their cameras, they sell their cars to live.
Let me just give you a sense, if I could, of how this city has changed. Ali, since August the 2nd, physically, how has Kuwait City been
actually
altered?
changed completely. If you come to Kuwait, you will say this is not Kuwait at all.
Why not?
Because Kuwait, it's famous about the buildings and the streets, nice and clean. Never you saw such thing. Just these soldiers came to Kuwait, destroy everything you saw, destroy the men here, anything they say, you mention anything about Kuwait, they destroy. They don't keep anything for Kuwait. I remember one story. They killed a lady, which is my age. She's 25 or something like that, because she was writing 25th of National Day. They saw the paper and they shoot her. And they, Kuwait, I think it's not Kuwait anymore.
Who are you?
I am a ward officer, Musad Saleh from Kuwait. I have some American Marines here with me. We are going to get inside the American embassy.
You have
and we are waiting for you, yes. And we are waiting for you to see what we are doing now with the American Marines.
Well, frankly, I'm not sure we can do that right this minute. But if you can wait for
I can't wait, sir, because we are already put the plans to get inside the American embassy.
All right, let me just throw this back to Dan Rather, and we'll discuss what our possibilities are. Can you wait for 30 seconds?
I can wait, but...
Dan, we said it was a fluid situation, and I think you've just had proof of it. We're going to discuss what our possibilities are here, and we'll throw it back to you for the time being.
Bob McEwen, one of our exclusive live reports from inside Kuwait City.
The group that originally was around us sort of gathered by the lights and the activity, and I've been kissed by more Kuwaiti men tonight than I can count. But now the dark set in. One gets the feeling that this still may be a dangerous place. We don't really know what's out there, and we're not quite sure where we're going to stay tonight. And I think we'll leave it at that.
It's after dawn now, and we join Bob McEwen live in Kuwait City.
Good morning, Charles.
Good morning. Where did you spend the night?
In our cars, as we have the past few nights. It's rather cramped, but it's the only accommodation we've been able to find here so far.
By the first light of dawn, Bob, have you been able to tell how great the damage is there in Kuwait City? We've heard that as the Iraqis pulled out, they did considerable damage to the hotels and some of the public buildings.
Yeah, I took a short drive around yesterday, just before dark fell, and it was possible to see the damage to the buildings. The Dasman Palace, the Emir's residence, is just up here. Huge holes blown in the wall around it. Around the corner is the official palace of the Emir, and it has virtually been devastated. Farther along this street, which runs on the seawall, the major hotels, and they look to have been burned in one way or another. We're told by the Iraqis generally just before they left, 2 or 3 days before the day before yesterday. So there's a sense, just in the little exposure we've had so far, that this place has suffered greatly over the past 7 months. But just to give you a sense of how quickly the Iraqis fled when they did, as we had a chance to wander around yesterday with our flashlights in the dark, we realized we were in the middle of a sand field full of Iraqi bunkers. And you can see the one next to me. There are personal belongings just strewn about as if the occupant of this one simply got up and ran. Elsewhere, we found a meal half-eaten, a candle still burning, and all around us, unexploded munitions, rocket-propelled grenades, mortar heads. We found a Saddam missile primed and ready to go. Over behind us, there's an anti-artillery battery. We're right in the middle of what would have been part of the fortification of the Iraqi troops if they had stayed to fight this war here.
It would have been rough if they had stayed, wouldn't it, Bob? We've been getting reports from inside Kuwait City from an informant these many months, and he said the Iraqis really were very well set up for house-to-house urban warfare, which would have been very rough on the Allies.
Yeah, it certainly would have, not to mention the few people who have remained here in Kuwait City. The Iraqis, we are told, took many of their homes in any event, and others simply left this city and the country. There are a lot of abandoned buildings. One gets the impression also that there are still some stragglers, Iraqis who have stayed in Kuwait City rather than to venture out one way or the other and take their chances. Last evening, a couple of U.S. Marines who are here securing the U.S. Embassy came by to tell us that the security situation, as they put it, is very, very iffy, that there are still pockets of resistance. Now, this is the morning when we expect the Allies to come in and officially liberate Kuwait City. As we drove in yesterday, the Allied force, basically the pan-Arab forces, Saudis, Kuwaitis themselves, Omanis, were about 20 or 30 kilometers down the highway. We haven't seen them so far, but we have seen a couple of things. About 200 yards or perhaps a little more over to my right near, I think that's the Hilton Hotel, we heard some sniper fire about 15 minutes ago. I don't think it was headed in our direction. And then an aircraft came in and dropped a bomb a few hundred yards back here over my left shoulder, presumably an American aircraft. I don't know what he might have been aiming at. There's a fort out there. I hope he wasn't aiming at us.
Bob, you have had quite an adventure these last few days. The last I heard from you, the Kuwaiti resistance had taken some Iraqis prisoner and were holding them in the basement of the supermarket. How'd that turn out?
Well, I think they're probably still there, Charles. On the way into Kuwait City, we met a group of people who stopped us briefly on the road, young men, early 20s, carrying Iraqi weapons, Iraqi rifles that had been left behind the night before. And they said, for the time being, they were the law in Kuwait. The citizens of this city have taken over, some of them for better, some of them possibly for worse. The estimate we've heard is that 80% of the people here in Kuwait City are armed right now, and that the Iraqis have contributed to that by leaving a great many of their rifles behind. We understand they do have 400 Iraqi soldiers being held in the basement of a supermarket. And we asked the gentleman with a gun who is doing the holding if, because of the things that have happened here under the Iraqis, he expected reprisals against these men. And he very specifically said no. He said that they would not do to the Iraqis the things that the Iraqis would have done to them. I suppose we'll have to see exactly how that turns out.
Bob McEwen, who occupied Kuwait City some hours ahead of any of the Allied troops. We'll get back to you, Bob, just a little later. Right now, we'll go to Susan Spencer in Daran.
Another eerie dawn has broken over the battlefields of Iraq and Kuwait. Correspondent Richard Threlkeld is in the western part of Kuwait, moving with the Arab forces, and he's with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan. You're quite right. Specifically, we're with the 3rd Egyptian Armored Division, or at least we spent the last 2 days with them, about 30 miles inside the Kuwait, in the center of the Allied line. And I can tell you as an eyewitness that the Iraqi forces have, and the Iraqi front here has specifically simply disappeared in the last 48 hours. At least 2,000, possibly as many as 3,000 Iraqi prisoners over the last 36 hours simply popped up out of their holes, carrying white flags, parachute flags, shouting salam, salam, which is the Egyptian Arab word for peace, peace, and giving themselves up with all of their weapons. They're a dejected, tired, hungry lot who spent many, many days trying to survive Allied bombing. Their officers, they tell us, simply fled with what vehicles they were when the attack began over the weekend. But I must say, I've covered a lot of wars. This is the first one that, in a sense, is almost pleasant, at least in this part of the line. There's been very, very few casualties, actually very little fighting other than a slight dust-up, a firefight sometime yesterday morning, but that was mostly outgoing Egyptian artillery and rockets. There has been very, very little return fire. And it's interesting in the many wars that I've covered over the years, this is the first time that I've seen at the end of a battle, both the victors and the vanquished smiling, actually smiling. The Iraqis smiling because they know they survived this war. They're going to live, and the Egyptians smiling because all 32,000 of them did not have to face the very bitter battle that they were expecting.
Dick, we were told by military people in the U.S. just quickly now that the Iraqis had no idea what was really in front of them. Is that been your impression?
Well, I think they had a pretty good idea of what they could expect because they had 30 or some days of bombing from, a whole armada of American air weapons. And so they knew that if the ground attack was going to be anything like that they had an overwhelming force that they probably had to deal with.
Richard Threlkeld in western Kuwait. Thank you. Ahead, how will this region rebuild after the war? We will hear from our Middle East analyst, Fuad Ajami. And a day in the desert as the war rages on.